Hello and welcome back to another EDH deck tech video. Today I'm still catching up with a few decks and I'm going to show off more of a casual thematic deck here with Etrata the Silencer. If you were familiar with my channel, you'll know a couple years ago I showed a Dimir Watermark deck, and this is the current deck. It's evolved. With the return to Ravnica, we have a handful of new cards, making the deck ever so slightly stronger and more playable. In that original video, I basically shuffled up all the commanders that were available, all four, and I just played one at random. It was typically Sadek. This time, although, we have a new one that's somewhat better, kinda, and it's just more of a flavorful thing. I was originally thinking about making a thematic deck around her alternate artwork, where the deck was people holding cups in their hands, but I decided to stick with the Watermark theme, just making it all Dimir. Now, Etrata here, I'm actually running her for a reason. She is a 4-mana, 3/5 unblockable. And there's this giant text box down here where if she hits a player, you exile a creature they control, and if that person has 3 cards exiled that way, then they win. Every time she hits and does that, you have to shuffle in the deck, though. Now, there's some issues with this, being that that's not exactly a May ability. Like, I have to exile a creature that player controls. And the reason I'm playing Etrata in this deck is to make use of some of the earlier Dimir mechanics as in Cipher. This is unfortunately the only unblockable Dimir commander. Now, we do have other like evasive ones like Mirko Vosk that flies, and he may be arguably better than Etrata for what this deck is trying to do. But realistically, I'm playing with a new thing. Now, again, there's other actual Etrata the Silencer decks you can play in EDH if you want to build and capitalize around her ability. Just keep in mind, you can double the triggered effect and put 2 counters on 2 creatures. But this check to lose the game, it has to have 3 cards. So putting multiple counters on 1 card exile doesn't do anything. But realistically, like a 4-mana, 3/5 unblockable, that's pretty good. And when playing this, you actually go after the person who doesn't have creatures, so you can try to do Cipher stuff. Now, this is a Watermark theme deck. Every card in the deck has this fancy little Dimir watermark on it here. That includes the lands. There are some new promo lands that I do not have. I'm not sure if I want them or not. So 100% of this deck, including Commander, all foil, all Dimir Watermark, all day, every day. Now, this deck does not have a set goal. Like, there's no actual win condition built into the deck. It's somewhat mill, somewhat like disruption, somewhat control, and somewhat like Hulk smash. So let's go through all the cards. If you want to know every card possible, you can go to a gather search engine, and you can search for Watermark, but there's a fair number of unplayable cards. For example, there's like a Cipher card that just changes the color of a permanent, and that was given a rare status for some reason. But let's take Etrata over here, and I will show you the other legendaries and the rest of the creatures here. So every legendary possible is in the deck. Some shouldn't be. We have the new Evasive. This is a new mechanic of the Dimir is Surveil, which is a somewhat, not quite scry. You put it into your graveyard. And decks that like to reanimate or give things flashback or snapcast or whatnot, very powerful mechanic. This deck, unfortunately, only has one way of rebuying our graveyard, and that, well, technically 2. We have a reanimation spell. Evasive here, he can become another creature. Unfortunately, most of the time, the opponents have better creatures, and we cannot take their stuff with his. So this is basically going to be a 2-mana, 1/3 disruption spell that surveils. We have the original Evasive, strictly better because he can become what the opponents have, and we do have the ability to mill our opponents in this deck. That is one way the deck can try to win. In short, I should explain it now. The biggest beaters are in this deck is the Consuming Aberration, which may be like a 50/50 or bigger, and that's a creature with like no evasion. Like, that is the way we can try to win with combat. We can try to mill the opponents out with something like Mind Grind, which is an X mill, X land spells. And we'll show that here shortly. Those are the 2 actual ways the deck tries to win. They're not very good, and of course Eldrazi throws that off. We don't have a lot of answers for Eldrazi that reshuffle. But we do have a lot of mill, and something like Evasive still becomes probably the best creature in the deck. Mirko is more or less the better aggro creature for a mill strategy. You can give him things like the sword that mills or so, and the flying is much better evasion than the Etrata, because Etrata, again, her issue is being unblockable is very powerful, but the fact that this is not a May ability kind of makes her a bit of a joke. Now we have Surku, which is actually my favorite commander. If you've seen my older videos, you know I've loved turning him into a combo engine. In this deck, it's generically good enough. There's a lot of mixture-colored spells to get double triggered on him, so it's still pretty good. And the one that probably should not be in here is Sadek, the original Guild Paron, who questionably may or may not be dead, or his spirit may or may not be floating around. We don't talk about that. The commander that can never do commander damage. In short, he does not actually do damage. Instead, you put counters, and they mill that many for 10, or 5, 10, 15. Yeah, it just, well, 5, 10, 20. Essentially, it gets bigger and bigger, and you mill them out. But realistically, your 7-drop, 5/5 flyer without protection is going to die. Then we have the non-legendary creatures. Dimir Doppelganger is one of the few ways we have to answer Eldrazi that may be milled over and reshuffling an opponent's deck. Again, this is potentially the best creature in our deck because we can take our opponent's creature. We have some new ones in a recursive creature, a nice little 3/1 chump blocker that tends to keep coming back. We have Notion Thief. There is a Cipher in here that is the whatever the Windfall Cipher. So yeah, we could get greedy with that. But we have very whimsical tutors in the deck. Again, there is a mechanic in the Dimir called Transmute, and there's a fair number of Transmute 3, 4, 5s. So we could try to build that. But realistically, we're just going to try to get a couple cards off this, and people will hate kill it. As I said, Transmute. This is one of the original mechanics of the Dimir Guild. It is a sorcery speed, even if it's an instant that transmutes, sorcery speed effect where you discard this card, pay that a mana cost, and you go tutor for a 3-drop. Originally in my video, I talked about all the ideal targets, but there's so many new toys that it just depends on what's needed at the moment. For example, this could just go get a Dimir Keyrune, or a counterspell, or a bounce spell, or a draw spell, whatever I need. A Flying Defender is nice against specific opponents because it's got a nice butt on him. This is here for, again, we like to attack. We're getting into more the attackers here. Surveilling is fantastic, but a 2-mana flyer is better because we have a few Cipher cards in here, and I'll show those shortly. Cipher being a mechanic where you imprint a card on a creature, and when that creature deals damage to an opponent, combat damage, you get to cast the card again. So cheap little evasion creatures are fantastic. Same thing. We have this in here mainly because he's unblockable. It is tempting to go get like some kind of 2-mana, whatever we need. But the evasion is more important. And Nightveil Predator, while we are still given, we're given a lot of very powerful cards, we still have to play with some of the bulk common and uncommons. This is just another evasive flying creature to cipher onto. We have Fear for more evasion. Sacrifice, we can't make use of this, but we can also transmute this for 4-drops if need be. Thief of Sanity and the Nightveil Spectre, the old menace of the Devotion era of Standard. And I don't know if he's more or less a menace now. I don't really play Standard right now. But things that like to attack in the air and fantastic value if they can hit. Let's go this way. Now we have more things that I wish could have evasion. A little bit of like, not quite a Finkel, but almost. And the Duskmantle Seer is like a mutual Dark Confidant for everybody. Luckily, our deck doesn't have a lot of high drop spells, and sometimes if someone reveals that Expropriate off the top of their deck, this is fantastic. Consuming Aberration is the best creature in our deck. This is how our deck tries to win via combat damage. If we can get rid of a blocker, this is realistically going to be a massive creature. Like this, doing math, eventually you just kind of stop doing the math when he gets over 50, and you assume it's just going to one-hit kill somebody. The problem is he has no evasion. There is very few ways we have of actually forcing him through. We have Doom Whisperer, which is probably one of the more powerful new cards in the deck. We can pay all of our life if we want, so we can just die. We have Dream Eater. Again, this is more or less a flash enabler. We want to end of turn flash it out and then cipher it and then go to combat. And the Mind Leech Mass is still in the deck. This is the most expensive creature and card in the entire deck, being a 6/6 Trampler. Hopefully it will connect at some point and give us a little bit of value. Let's go on through the massive chunk of spells. These are not broken down by card type like Instant Sorcery, but more or less by card function. Let's see if we can focus. Yeah. Now there's a fair number of counters, which is good because while our deck is very underpowered, the best thing we can do is at least stop the opponent from killing us. Muddle is typically used to go tutor up some 2-drop in a mono blue control deck. In this deck, realistically, we are going to hold it as a counter spell because our deck is very weak. We have Dimir Charm, again, as a counter and or removal. We may do the top deck thing if someone end of turn Vampire Tutors and they somehow give us priority again. We have another counter that mills a little bit. A counter that most likely won't counter, or it just dumps their hand, depends on what they're doing. This can transmute for 3, and realistically, gambling I don't like this counterspell. This is basically a 3-mana transmute for 3, and again, this is an instant, but this effect has to be done at sorcery speed, so don't let that get you. We have basically a cancel that surveils, and a 4-mana counter that tends to mill a lot. I like holding this up if my opponents are going to cast some giant X spell. We have a little bit of bounce and sacrifice, the more powerful split fuse cards. I wish and or hope that fuse comes back in the last set. We have a bounce. Again, this is something that we can hit a land with, a planeswalker with if we need to, but it could be a transmute for a 4-drop. Warped Psyche is a bulk crap card, but it is one of very few removal spells that we have in this deck. It could be used as a pump spell, and if we have like 4 cards in hand, for example, we can pump Etrata up to 7 power. I mean, hitting people with combat damage is a relevant thing. Commander damage, that is. We have, again, a whimsical removal spell. This is going to hopefully make way for our Consuming Aberration to hit somebody. We have a, hopefully, 2-mana costing removal spell. If not, it's just a bad removal spell. The Surveil's nice. Brain Spoil, again, can help us transmute for many 5-drops, or just destroys an unenchanted creature. Twisted Justice is probably an overpriced card that should not be in the deck. 6 mana is a lot. I think I just have fond memories of this card. I really do like the art. I don't know how clearly this shows, but there's actually a specter, like a spirit in the background controlling the judge, making his fist go down in favor of this guy. Like, it's just beautifully and thematic. I love this card. Again, 6 mana sucks, but the odds of that one opponent not having any other sacrifice fodder when they dump out like their Eldrazi, this will hopefully at least get you 1 card in return. We have more split cards. Unfortunately, these do not fuse. The fact that this is an instant from the graveyard is very good. We have Notion Rain, which is Surveil 2 and Draw 2. It does make us take 2, but we have basically, it's just like Divination. And another version of Divination and or Mind Rot. This is almost always used for the Divination effect unless an opponent has dumped their hand setting up for a broken turn and they only have 2 cards left. And we actually have Divination that mills. So 3 divinations. A bit more expensive of a divination, but if we hit this on a Etrata or another evasive creature, we will hopefully get a bit more. Whispering Madness is like a windfall, but it does Cipher. So hitting this on an unblockable creature means we can keep cranking through our deck and playing everything we can. This is fantastic if we have a Notion Thief out because we can wreck everyone else's hands. Might give this deck a chance to actually win. Glimpse the Unthinkable used to be the most expensive card in the deck, and I've been holding on to this pretty pack foil for I don't know how long I've had this. Unfortunately, it's been reprinted a few times, like once, twice now, and it just does not have a value. It's no longer the most expensive. I think the most expensive card in this entire deck, other than the basic lands, is the Doom Whisperer. We have Paranoid Delusions. Mill 3 sucks, but if we get this on like a turn 2 unblockable creature, we can usually get about 9+ cards out of someone's deck. We have Psychic Drain, which is the only way of gaining life in this entire deck. Pretty nice to offset the Surveil cost off the Doom Whisper. And an X spell is nice at just hitting someone's deck as hard as possible. But better yet, it is the best milled card we have in the deck. If we can survive until late in the game, we can hit this and hopefully mill out an entire group of players. Especially the green ramp players at the table that like to ramp all their lands into play. This is a fantastic card. Unfortunately, again, you have to be wary of those who play Eldrazi, because if they reshuffle, you just undid all of the work. This is a legitimate win condition in the right deck, and I have played this in other Grixis Control mill decks as a random finisher. A lot of people love running things like Extendrinade and the Torment of Hailfire, but I like the more splashy ones, and this is a very fun one. Now, we do have a little bit of recursion here. We have Mission Briefing. This is the pseudo Snapcaster, not quite Snapcaster Mage. As an instant, we do have a nice chunk of spells we can try to revive. For example, now again, this only hits instant sorceries, so we can try to hit something like Mind Grind a second time. And the best thing, the reason this is sometimes arguably better than Snapcaster, this does not target a spell. Snapcaster targets the spell. This says you choose a spell and you go ahead and cast it. More hate for those ramp decks, anyone cracking a fetch land or trying to tutor together a combo piece with Tooth and Nail. I used to play this in Modern all the time as a sideboard thing. It's just a very funny card. And a new pet card, again, card that probably is better in a Grixis control deck, Mnemonic Betrayal. It's like Yawgmoth's Will, but for all of your opponents. Unfortunately, while it says you exile all the opponents' graveyards at the same time, unfortunately, they get the cards you don't cast back. I wish it was not like that. Like, I would even be willing to pay 4 mana if they didn't get those cards back. We have more split cards. Again, both of these being a sorcery. This one is a gain control of utility creature, or I get to reanimate a creature. And this is helpful being that we can reanimate something juicy like the Doom Whisper if we need to. We have more Cipher cards. This is probably the best Cipher card in the deck. If we can get something like this on a relevant creature, something like Mirko Vosk, for example, when they don't kill it, we can keep tapping down whatever their best blocker is. If they have something scary like an Eldrazi out or something like that. We do have, again, this is more graveyard hate. Try to hit the Eldrazi before they reshuffle, and again, this can tutor for something better. We have Undercity Plague and Stolen Identity as 2 more Cipher cards. A somewhat one-sided Smallpox is fantastic, but it's 6 mana. You better make sure you can actually get through before you bother. Like, I would not recommend ever just casting this if you can't attack and get a second hit at the same time. This being a clone is fantastic too, because again, the creatures in our deck kind of suck, and getting the creatures from the opponents are better. Like if they even have just a Solemn Simulacrum out. Fantastic. Actually, this is the last Cipher. So we do have this in the deck. This may be, again, one of the better cuts if the last set of the Ravnica block that we're in has more Dimir Watermark cards. This will be maybe one to go. This is here because it does make little 1/1 flyers. And if you're unfamiliar, if you didn't draft at the time this was here, you can cast this and you get the token. I have the tokens right here. And when the token comes into play, you can then cipher this onto the token. So the token hits next turn, you can make more of them. It's a cute little, like, fun, drafty crap card, but in this deck, it's kind of what we have to deal with. Now, there is only one enchantment in the deck. We used to have the enchantment where we gain control of an opponent's creature and they could discard 2 and you draw 2 to sack the enchantment. Realistically, that's just not good. We do have Disinformation Campaign, although, because we have a fantastic rate of surveilling in this deck. And this is basically 3 mana, each opponent discards a card. And I draw a card. It's an okay card. For 3 mana, it's pretty on par what we can deal with in this deck. Now, I have seen some people commenting that if you play this, you become a target. Realistically, I mean, you cannot control your surveil unless you have some kind of infinite loop going on. Like, I can't just go infinite with the Doom Whisper in that, for example. Oop, come here. Oh, by the way, I definitely have the snazzy Dimir sleeves on here. While these sleeves are nice for the watermark and the shuffle is interesting, I hate that the gray on the inside is not the same as the rest. The last non-land permanents here, we have a few artifacts. In the original Ravnica City block, each artifact, or each guild, had its own artifact that did something clever. My favorite is the Rakdos Right Knife. Blood Right Knife? No, just Right Knife. But it's really hard to use. The Bloodletter Quill, although, is actually pretty good in EDH. It's like a slow, poor man's version of a Greed or an Erebos, or maybe even considered like a bad Phyrexian Arena. The thing is, you can control when to activate this, and you can actually remove blood counters. Eventually, you can just keep paying it and activating it, and then hopefully regain a bunch of life off of that X mil gain life spell. But realistically, this is probably one of the better long game permanents we can see if we get it out early enough. And then we have the Signet for some 3-drops, Key Rune, Cluestone, and the new Dimir Locket, essentially a slightly upgraded Cluestone. These are still kind of garbage. Like, I still don't mind playing a Key Rune in this deck because the unblockable creature. You can Cipher. Cipher stays on the permanent of the card, so even at end of turn when this reverts to an artifact, it is still known to have the Cipher ability on it. But the 3-drop ramps suck. Now, as a deck that only has 4 mana rocks in the deck, we are running 40 lands. That's a lot. And then again, this is like an unusual EDH deck. This is a thematic deck. It's not designed to go and win every game. This is a deck designed to have fun with. And I'll talk about my Is It Russian Watermark deck here in just a few seconds. But we have the 4 non-basics that we can. The Watery Grave, the Dimir Aqueduct, the old Duskmantle House of Shadow, and the Dimir Guildgate. I prefer this artwork over the Gatecrash. And then we have the old promo Watermark lands. Each land has the House Dimir and their logo on it. So we have 18, I think. Yeah, 18 islands and 18 swamps. Now, there are new Watermark lands. You can get non-foil Watermark lands from the Guild kits, and the Watermark actually encompasses the entire area here. And there are new game day promo foil versions of said lands as well. The Dimir ones look very good. I really like these old ones, although the Japanese text does throw me off a little bit because the entire deck's in English except for those. I may get just one of each and go down to 38 lands, for example, because that would give me... I'm slightly OCD, so having an even number of swamps and an even number of islands is pleasing. But I may alter the land count to go to 16 of each, get 2 of the new ones, and go from there, depending if we get more ramp to work with. But yeah, this is my Dimir Watermark deck, ran by Etrata, the Silencer. The best thing I can do, if you have the desire for this, definitely check this out. Like, even before this most recent set, each guild had enough cards to create a playable EDH deck. Just from Return to Ravnica and Original Ravnica. The new set gave us even more cards, so the decks are slightly more powerful. Originally, before this new set, on a grading scale of 1 to 10 of power, I was considering these decks to be about a 3, slightly below the power of a precon, an EDH precon. With these additional cards, the deck still does not have a focused linear strategy, but they are slightly stronger than an EDH precon now, which is good. Unfortunately, a lot of opponents don't always understand the power level of a Watermarked themed deck, so while it's incredibly flavorful, it's not going to compete with what most people are playing. So you bring it out when you plan on losing, or when you plan on having fun interactions, or if everyone at your table is doing the same. And I would actually recommend that. If you have a play group that has the desire for more thematic and longer commander games, everyone can pick a guild and build the entire deck where every card has to have the Watermark. I would make 2 very strong suggestions if you do that. If someone plays Gruul, do not let the player play Ruark Thar as the commander. And if someone plays Boros, do not let someone play Aurelia, the original Aurelia, as the commander. Those 2 cards, this is speaking from experience, those 2 commanders, if you were having, you can do all 10 guilds. Those 2 commanders will be the 2 strongest decks at the table no matter what. Ruark Thar will wreck anybody, and it's definitely the strongest. And second to that is Aurelia, because the flying double combat kills people way too fast for what these decks can deal with. But yeah, there's other Watermark brews you can do too. Another old series I did was with the Phyrexian Watermark, doing mono red and mono blue, and a friend again did mono black. The volume of mono black cards is like 4 times as many as the quantity of mono blue or red cards to work with, so that was unbalanced. There's other Watermarks, newer ones like Dimir and Jeskai Watermarks, but there's not enough to actually build a functional deck yet. But yeah, if you have any ideas or feedback, or if you enjoy these thematic decks, definitely let me know. Thanks.